The dry grass freezes. Not a breath of wind, not a sound. Only a hot haze trembles over the red Indian earth. And suddenly, a low, menacing whistle. A cobra's head rises from the undergrowth. Its hood opens slowly, as if the snake wants to arouse fear before it makes its first move. And a few steps away, almost pressed to the ground, a small animal slightly larger than a cat stands frozen. A mongoose. Its fur stands on end, its tail fluffed out, its eyes unblinking. One bite from this cobra can kill a person in a matter of hours. The mongoose doesn't stand a chance, or so it seems at first glance. But it is at this moment that one of the most amazing battles in the wild begins. Did you know that the mongoose's body is designed in such a way that even the deadly venom of a cobra has almost no effect on it? In this episode, we'll explore how this small predator defeats an opponent whose bite is fatal to most mammals. You'll learn what happens in the mongoose's body at the molecular level, why the cobra even engages in a fight it clearly doesn't want, and whether it's true that a mongoose's victory is always a cakewalk. Spoiler alert: no. Even with its special defenses, this battle can end in the death of both participants. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Mongooses are small predatory mammals of the mongoose family, Herpestidae. The Indian grey mongoose, Herpestes edwardsii, is the most well known in India and southern Asia. It weighs between 1 and 2 kilograms, and its body length, including tail, is about 70 centimeters. It has an unremarkable appearance, a narrow body, short legs, and a pointed snout. Yet, for centuries, this animal has been considered a symbol of victory over snakes. Even in ancient texts and fairy tales, the mongoose was depicted as the cobra's #1 enemy. The legendary story of the mongoose Rikki Tikki Tavi, invented by writer Rudyard Kipling, made this image famous worldwide. But behind this beautiful story lies real biology, and it's even more interesting than any fairy tale. For a long time, scientists were baffled as to why cobra bites, fatal to dogs, cats, and humans, often fail to kill mongooses. The answer was discovered only in the second half of the 20th century, when researchers began to study in detail how cobra venom affects the body. The venom of most cobras is a neurotoxin. These are substances that block the transmission of nerve signals between neurons and muscles. In ordinary mammals, the venom binds to special receptors on the surface of muscle cells, acetylcholine receptors. These are like door locks, through which the nervous system commands muscles to move. When cobra venom enters the body, it literally inserts itself into these locks and locks them. The muscles stop receiving signals, causing paralysis. If the diaphragm is paralyzed, the victim suffocates. In mongooses, these locks are structured slightly differently. The receptor's shape is slightly altered compared to most other mammals, so much so that the venom molecule simply can't properly catch on it. Scientists call this phenomenon neurotoxin resistance, and this trait is found not only in mongooses, but also in some other animals that frequently encounter snakes, such as hedgehogs and honey badgers. Similar, but not identical defenses have also been described in some species that have lived alongside venomous snakes for many generations. This doesn't mean that mongooses are completely harmless to venom. Rather, their bodies are much less sensitive to a particular type of toxin than most other mammals. Scientists suggest that this characteristic developed as a result of a long evolutionary struggle. Mongooses hunted snakes for many thousands of years, and individuals with slightly more resistant receptors survived more often, leaving more offspring, and gradually, this trait became entrenched in the population. It's worth clarifying right away. The mongoose doesn't feed exclusively on snakes. Its main diet is much more modest: insects, small rodents, lizards, bird eggs, and occasionally fruit. Snakes are more of a special, risky but nutritious prey item,
which the mongoose doesn't eat every day. The territories of mongooses and cobras often overlap. Both species favor dry bushes, field edges, rocky slopes, and abandoned buildings where rodents and therefore food are abundant. Because of this, encounters occur regularly, especially during the season, when food becomes scarce and both predators expand their hunting routes. There's another reason for such skirmishes. Mongooses often raid snake burrows or explore their territory in search of eggs and young.
A cobra defending its clutches or its territory in such a situation becomes less prey than an obstacle to be circumvented, and sometimes even overcome. Before delving into the fight itself, it's important to understand neither the mongoose nor the cobra are eager to fight. This isn't a villain versus hero story. Both animals are well aware of the risk involved in such a duel, and much of the confrontation isn't about blows, but rather a psychological game. When a cobra spots a mongoose, its first reaction is to intimidate it without engaging. It opens its hood, raises the front third of its body, hisses and sways. This is a classic warning signal. Go away, I'm dangerous. A cobra's hood opening, the so-called threat posture, is a surefire way to deter most predators. It visually increases the snake's size, and the characteristic pattern on its hood, in some species it resembles two large eyes, enhances the intimidating effect. But the mongoose reacts differently. It doesn't run or charge headlong. Instead, it engages in what zoologists call exploratory behavior. It approaches in short bursts, retreats, approaches again from a different angle, and likely touches the ground next to the snake with its paw, as if testing its distance and reaction speed. Each such movement isn't a flurry of fuss, but a precise calculation. The mongoose assesses the speed at which the cobra can strike, how far it can reach, and which way its head will move before attacking. Scientists who have observed such encounters in the wild and in controlled experiments have noted that experienced adult mongooses act much more cautiously and calculatively than young individuals, who are more likely to take risks and suffer injuries. If poison resistance is a kind of insurance, then the mongoose's main weapon in combat remains speed. And here the numbers are truly impressive. The mongoose can react to an opponent's movements in a split second, faster than most mammals of comparable size. It is this reaction speed, rather than physical strength, that allows it to evade the cobra's strikes, which are themselves among the fastest attacking movements in the animal kingdom. A cobra's strike is a sharp, almost instantaneous forward movement, during which the snake's head covers a distance of a third or even half its own body length. In a large cobra, this can be a throw of about a meter. This attack appears as a blur to the human eye. The mongoose counters this not with strength, but with a low, flexible body and a special evasive technique. It doesn't leap back in a straight line. That would make it easy to catch up with a second strike, but instead moves sideways in an arc, simultaneously lowering itself closer to the ground. This movement disrupts the cobra's trajectory calculations and forces it to re-prepare for each new attack. The thick, ruffled fur on the mongoose's scruff and back also plays a role. The raised fur visually increases the animal's size and simultaneously creates a soft cushion that somewhat softens and diffuses any glancing bite, preventing the fangs from immediately reaching the skin. Contrary to popular myth, a fight between a mongoose and a large cobra rarely ends in a few seconds with a single spectacular lunge. More often, it's a long, grueling process that can last 10, 15, and sometimes even more minutes. The mongoose deliberately provokes the cobra into repeated attacks. Each strike requires the snake to expend significant energy, a strong muscle contraction, a sharp forward thrust, and then a return to its original position. Unlike the mongoose, the cobra lacks the stamina for multiple rapid strikes in a row. With each new attempt, its movements become slightly slower, its reactions slightly less accurate. The mongoose, on the other hand, seems to deliberately conserve its strength, using short, explosive bursts and then retreating immediately, giving itself a split second to recover. This tactic of slowly wearing down its opponent, the same logic many predators use when hunting prey physically stronger than themselves. At some point, the cobra begins to slow down, its strikes becoming shorter and less accurate. This is precisely the moment the mongoose waits for. It lunges forward, aiming to grab the snake by the head or at the base of the skull, where the cobra physically can't reach its fangs. Grasping at this precise point is a key, naturally honed technique. If the mongoose misses and grabs the snake closer to the middle of the body, the enraged cobra is still able to twist and bite. It's important to immediately dispel another myth. The mongoose doesn't win every such encounter. There are numerous documented cases where a larger or more experienced cobra has inflicted a fatal bite on a mongoose, especially a young and inexperienced one. Resistance to venom reduces the risk of death, but does not eliminate it entirely. If there are multiple bites, if the venom enters the bloodstream in large quantities, or if the mongoose is exhausted, weakened, or injured before the fight begins, the outcome can be tragic, even for an animal with special biochemical defenses. Scientists emphasize that mongoose resistance to venom is not absolute immunity, but merely a significantly higher pain threshold for survival compared to other mammals. This is why experienced adult mongooses prefer to avoid encounters with very large cobras if possible. The real strength of this animal lies not so much in its ability to survive a bite, but in its ability to do everything possible to prevent one from occurring in the first place. And here arises a question worth keeping in mind for the rest of this story. If the mongoose truly has biological defenses against venom, why is a fight between it and a cobra still a deadly game of chance, rather than a guaranteed victory? The answer turns out to be much more complex than it seems at first glance, and we'll explore it in the next part. Let's start with a key clarification, without which it's easy to fall into error. The mongoose's resistance to cobra neurotoxin operates on the principle of impeded access, not complete blockage. The venom molecule binds less readily to the altered receptors, but binding is not completely eliminated. This means that with a small dose, the mongoose's body can indeed cope with it with almost no consequences. The toxin simply doesn't have time to cause critical paralysis, while the immune and nervous systems adapt. But with a large dose, with several bites in a row, or if the venom enters a blood vessel rather than subcutaneously, the defense mechanism may be overwhelmed. Scientists who have studied this resistance in various species note that a similar, but not identical, trait is found in hedgehogs, badgers, and honey badgers, animals that also frequently engage in combat with snakes. Each of these species has its own degree of resistance, and none offers 100% protection. It's like the difference between light and heavy body armor. It reduces the risk of death, but it doesn't make the animal invulnerable. Therefore, even an experienced adult mongoose engaging in a fight with a large cobra truly risks its life. And it is precisely this risk that explains why most such encounters in the wild never escalate to open combat. It's important to dispel another stereotype. A cobra is not an aggressive hunter who will attack a mongoose at the first opportunity. In fact, for a snake, fighting a mongoose is also an extremely risky and energy-consuming endeavor, which it tries to avoid. The fact is that venom is not an infinite resource for a cobra. Its production requires significant energy and time for the glands to regenerate. Having expended its entire venom supply in a single unsuccessful encounter, the snake is temporarily rendered virtually defenseless against other predators and risks being unable to obtain food in its usual manner. Therefore, the cobra prefers to use threat displays, spreading its hood, hissing, and swaying, precisely as a way to avoid actual contact, rather than as a prelude to an inevitable attack.
Zoological observations show that in most recorded encounters between mongooses and cobras, bites or attacks never occur. The snake, realizing it faces a persistent, unafraid opponent, prefers to slowly retreat to cover, a burrow, a crevice, or dense thickets, where it is more difficult for the mongoose to pursue. The mongoose, for its part, doesn't always seek combat. If the prey appears too risky and alternative food is available, it may well abandon the pursuit. That is, a real, full-fledged fight to the finish happens much less often than one might imagine from films and videos, where the climactic, most dramatic moments are specially shown for the sake of an impressive picture.
When the fight actually begins, its duration can vary greatly. Brief skirmishes, ending with one side quickly retreating, last literally a few dozen seconds. But protracted encounters, in which the cobra decides to stand its ground to the end and the mongoose is determined, can last 10 minutes or more. And in some recorded cases, observers have described standoffs lasting nearly half an hour, with several pauses during which both animals seem to catch their breath, without, however, completely breaking their distance. This pause is also part of the tactic. Neither the mongoose nor the cobra can maintain peak concentration and reaction speed indefinitely. Short pauses allow both combatants to catch their breath and reduce stress hormone levels for a split second before the fight resumes with renewed vigor. Even with all the mongoose's caution, bites still happen. And this is where the most dangerous part of the story begins. If the bite is a glancing blow, hitting only the thick fur and not the skin, the dose of venom absorbed may be minimal, and the mongoose is able to continue the fight with almost no consequences. But if the cobra's fangs pierce the skin and the venom penetrates soft tissue in sufficient quantities, a real race begins between the speed of the toxin's spread and the mongoose's ability to neutralize its effects. The animal may begin to show initial symptoms: slowed reaction times, slight tremors, and temporary weakness. At this point, the outcome of the encounter becomes truly unpredictable. There are documented cases of a wounded mongoose, having been bitten, nevertheless managing to bring the fight to an end and emerge victorious, after which it would literally fall into a stupor for a time while its body dealt with the remaining toxin. There are also reverse examples of a young, inexperienced specimen dying after being bitten by a large cobra, despite its natural resistance. It is precisely this uncertainty that makes such fights a real battle for survival, in the most literal sense of the word, and not a spectacular stunt whose outcome is predetermined. It's worth noting that a mongoose's success in such encounters depends heavily not only on its innate biology, but also on experience. Young individuals encountering a snake for the first time are much more likely to act carelessly. They approach too close, misjudge the throwing distance, and react too late. With age, after several successful, and unfortunately sometimes unsuccessful encounters, the mongoose gradually develops a kind of combat experience. It begins to more accurately read the snake's body language and notice subtle signs of preparation for a strike. A slight shift in body weight, a change in the angle of the neck, a change in the frequency of its swaying movements. Observations of mongooses kept in controlled conditions to study their behavior revealed an interesting detail. Even very young individuals who had never seen a live snake showed a wary reaction to its silhouette or scent, suggesting a partially innate, instinctive component to this behavior. However, the filigree, almost choreographic precision of movements in a real fight truly only comes with practice. Another detail that often goes unnoticed: some mongoose species, unlike the solitary Indian grey mongoose, live in groups. For species like the meerkat, Suricata suricata, an encounter with a snake often turns into a group effort. Several individuals take turns distracting and harassing the snake from different sides, significantly reducing the risk to each individual. This doesn't make the fight any less dangerous, but it significantly increases the group's chances of success compared to a solo encounter. In this sense,
The Indian grey mongoose is a riskier lone fighter. It has to rely only on itself, its reactions, and biochemical defenses. This whole picture, the constant danger, the unpredictability of the outcome, the dependence on experience and luck at the same time, leads us to the main question of the next, final part of this story. What happens to the mongoose after victory? How does its body cope with the consequences of even a successful fight? And why did nature itself construct such a brutal, yet incredibly effective arms race between these two species? When a mongoose manages to defeat a cobra, usually with a precise bite to the base of the skull, rendering the snake unable to defend itself, the fight itself is over, but the body's recovery is only just beginning.
Even if only a small amount of venom has entered the body, the mongoose's body still needs time to completely eliminate and neutralize the toxin. Scientists studying mongoose physiology note that this animal has an extremely high metabolic rate compared to many other mammals of similar size. The mongoose's heart beats significantly faster than that of animals of comparable body weight, and its liver and kidneys work at an increased rate, pumping blood through their filtering organs more quickly. This accelerated metabolism is no coincidence, but is likely another part of its overall adaptation to encounters with venomous snakes. The faster the body can process and eliminate toxins, the greater the chance of fully recovering from a bite, even if receptor resistance isn't perfectly maintained. After a particularly intense fight, a mongoose often enters a state of torpor. It reduces activity, retreats into cover, and barely moves for several hours. This isn't a sign of weakness, but rather a defensive strategy. Minimal physical activity slows the rate at which the remaining venom spreads through the bloodstream and gives the organs time to cope with the strain. Having observed such animals in the wild, zoologists have repeatedly recorded precisely this behavior, a period of almost complete immobility, followed by a gradual return to normal activity over the course of a day or so. Even a successful cobra hunt is costly for a mongoose. Besides potential poisoning, the animal often suffers common injuries during a fight: scratches, bruises, and sometimes broken small leg bones during sudden leaps and dodges. The energy expenditure is also colossal. 10 to 15 minutes of continuous dashes, dodges, and short sprints is comparable in exertion to a multi-hour hunt for ordinary prey. This is why, despite the fact that cobra meat is quite nutritious and calorie-dense, the mongoose does not make snake hunting its primary source of sustenance. The risk is too great, the energy expenditure too high, and the outcome too unpredictable. Its diet far more often includes much safer insects, rodents, lizards, and bird eggs. And fighting a snake becomes more of a necessary measure, for example, when a cobra threatens the mongoose itself, its young, or its shelter, rather than a planned hunting strategy. To understand the origins of this astonishing confrontation, it's worth looking at it through the eyes of evolutionary biology. What's happening between the mongoose and the cobra is a classic example of a so-called co-evolutionary arms race, a process in which two species gradually arm themselves against each other over many generations, countering each other's evolutionary advantage with their own. A similar process, incidentally, is observed in other parts of the planet, for example between certain species of newts and certain snakes, where the newt has developed an extremely potent toxin in its skin, while the snake that preys on it has developed a partial resistance to this venom. This isn't an isolated case, but a fairly common evolutionary pattern. Predator and potential prey literally drive each other for thousands and thousands of years. In the case of the mongoose and cobra, the logic was apparently something like this. Mongooses, like most mammals, initially possessed a normal nervous system, vulnerable to neurotoxins. But individuals whose receptors, as a result of random genetic changes, were slightly less convenient for binding venom, gained a significant evolutionary advantage. They were more likely to survive accidental encounters with snakes, more likely to survive to reproduce, and passed this trait on to their offspring. Over time, over many generations, this trait became entrenched and spread throughout the population. A counter-process was also underway. Cobras, whose venom was slightly less effective against such resistant predators, may have gradually developed a more complex, multi-component toxin composition. Scientists have indeed noted that the venom of some cobra species is a mixture of several types of toxins with different effects, which could have been a response to the development of partial resistance to individual venom components in some potential prey. Direct evidence that this change in venom composition was a targeted evolutionary response, specifically to mongooses, is still insufficient, and scientists cautiously consider this a plausible, but not fully confirmed, hypothesis. The story of the confrontation between the mongoose and the cobra clearly demonstrates one important point. In the wild, the winner is not always the one who is larger, stronger, or more dangerous at first glance. The cobra possesses a deadly weapon, venom capable of killing an animal far larger than the mongoose itself. But weaponry alone is not enough. The mongoose counters this weapon not with force or its own venom, but with a combination of more subtle qualities: lightning-fast reactions, precise distance calculation, patient attrition of the enemy, partial biochemical resistance, and, importantly, a willingness to take risks only when the odds are truly justified. Where the risk is too high and there is an alternative, the mongoose simply retreats. And this, too, is a manifestation of its strength, not physical, but behavioral. Let's recall the scene with which we opened this episode. Frozen grass, a cobra's open hood, a mongoose frozen in tension. In most cases, such a scene ends not in a deadly battle, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible finale. The cobra slowly retreats to cover, and the mongoose, realizing the game isn't worth the candle, returns to its usual activities, searching for insects, guarding its territory, caring for its young. And only in rare cases, when there's no turning back, when life, cubs, or territory are at stake, does this silent duel of stares escalate into one of the most intense and spectacular fights ever witnessed in the wild. A fight in which there is no clear villain and no clear hero. There are simply two species that millions of years ago began a race from which neither can afford to lose completely, but which both, if possible, try not to begin in the first place. This is precisely why nature is rarely simple. What appears to be a classic story of a brave hero and a dangerous villain actually turns out to be a complex interplay of evolution, instincts, precise calculation, and a simple reluctance to take unnecessary risks on both sides. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like. It truly helps the channel grow. Subscribe so you don't miss future wildlife stories. And be sure to let us know in the comments, who do you think is truly stronger in this pair? The mongoose, with its incredible reflexes and resistance to venom, or the cobra, with its deadly weapon? We'd love to hear your thoughts.